And it's easier than it appears because you and I, we carry a fight or flight or freeze instinct. It's inside of us, it is. But we also carry cooperation, connection, togetherness instinct. That is also inside of us because natural selection favored those with connecting instincts. Consequently, we saw during the first part of the lesson how the whites of our eyes evolved to broadcast where we're looking, to encourage a very self-revealing part of us to one another, eye contact. Also, I didn't mention this last time, but we blush. And when we do, what we are broadcasting to one another is that we care what one another thinks. I mentioned Richard Dawkins' book about the selfish gene, how subsequent editions of that book had to change some conclusions because we are actually born more friendly than we are born selfish, more friendly than we are competitive, because natural selection also favored friendly people. They had more kids than the dominating people. So you and I carry more friendly genes than we do carry competitive genes, more get-along genes, more oneness genes. Could call it survival of the friendliest. So being an ultra-social species as we are constantly revealing our internal states to one another, which is not, as sometimes we feel, a bug in the system. It actually is the system. Cooperating in close contact with one another, that has become our superpower. It's how we have become the species that we are. It is our superpower. Cooperating, togetherness, those instincts are our superpower. Well, if you missed that week, you can have a listen online. Today we're going to talk about how to tap into that superpower, how to tap into our oneness creating features, the parts of us that are inside of us. Well, here are the questions that we're going to be talking about afterwards. You're going to hear today that we tap into that oneness creating part of ourselves by being in contact and being curious about the other. Being in contact and being curious about the other. So we're going to start with this question. My group, the people that I consider my people, who are we uncurious about? Who are we uncurious about? We've already made a judgment. We've already come to conclusions. We're not even questioning anymore. Who are we uncurious about? And then we're going to start together thinking about how we can make even small contact with those we are uncurious about, especially given how segregated our society has become, how distant our groups are from one another. How could we take some steps toward creating contact, engendering security, or curiosity? That's the word today. All right, so be thinking about that. The companion book that I've mentioned several times for this lesson, Humankind, it has a thought experiment in it. 2 tribes on a planet, the geniuses and the copycats. Now, the geniuses are brilliant. 1 in 10 of them figure out how to fish. The copycats, less brilliant. 1 in 1,000 figure out how to fish. So the geniuses are 100 times smarter than the copycats. But the geniuses are not as social. They only teach 1 friend how to fish, whereas the copycats teach 10 friends how to fish. So then the author does a whole bunch of math, and in the end he says, given a few generations, half of the geniuses know how to fish, but all of the copycats know how to fish. And then he also then talks about a bunch of genetics and a bunch of fossils and says Neanderthals had bigger brains than sapiens, but sapiens had more of these sociable features. So comes the last ice age, the environment changes rapidly, and Neanderthals with bigger brains did not survive, but the friendlier sapiens did. Sapiens togethered their way through the ice age, whereas Neanderthals did not. Survival of the friendliest. All of which to say, being oneness people, even living in a sharply divided world as we do, it's inside of us. We carry those attributes, we carry those skills, we carry those traits inside of ourselves. So being oneness people in a two-ness world is not as difficult as it appears. So today, we'll talk about how do we access that superpower. How do we get to it so that we can draw from that part that's already inside of us? How do we draw from that part of ourselves? And I've distilled a whole bunch of stuff from our spiritual tradition, from our wisdom tradition, down to that one phrase, get curious. That's how we access that part of ourselves. We get curious. Because there are a lot of ancient texts that talk about not judging one another. A lot of texts that talk about looking out for one another, especially looking out for the outsider, about being slow to speak and quick to listen, about being slow to anger, about being full of grace, all of which can be summed up with this fundamental idea: get curious. Because oneness people are curious people. When we're curious, we ask ourselves, that one, the one I'm divided from, what am I missing about that person? What do I not know? Oneness people are curious people. Now, here's the thing. Uncurious people get a little rigid, get a little bit stuck in preconceived certainty. Uncurious people stop listening, stop learning, stop discovering. If you do that, the other will stay the other in perpetuity. Really, uncuriosity is a kind of arrogance. We convince ourselves of our own infallibility, whereas curiosity, on the other hand, is a posture of unknowing. Now, the thing about unknowing, it's not the same as stupid. I often get asked about some religious doctrine or other, probably because of my job. And I will often respond, I might have responded to you something along the lines of, well, let me tell you about my well-informed ignorance. Because I know what people say they know about this doctrine or that doctrine, but I don't know. And as gently as I can, I also say, and as convinced as they are otherwise, they don't know either. I know enough to know that we just cannot know. When it comes to things in the spiritual life, we have to hold our perspective, our knowledge, our working metaphor. We have to hold those things with an open hand. Well, it turns out the same thing is true with those from whom we are divided. We have to hold our assessments of them with an open hand. We have to be suspicious of what we think about them, always asking ourselves, what am I missing? What is the bigger picture? What is the part of this that I do not yet understand? But now here's the thing, that's tough to do. I wrote this down recently because I thought it was meaningful, but I can't remember where I got it. I don't know the answer, but I will stand with you in the anxiety of not knowing. I don't know the answer, but I'll stand with you in the anxiety of not knowing. I liked it because it highlights an important aspect of curiosity. We don't like it. We don't like to be curious. Curiosity makes us uncomfortable because curiosity is predicated on the concept we don't know. We are not certain. We don't have absolute confidence. And we like certainty, and we like to be fully confident in our beliefs. So that makes curiosity, all that will go into helping us become oneness people, it makes curiosity hard work. And because it is hard work, that's why we focus so much on spiritual practice. It's why we do the cataphatic and the apophatic practices. If you haven't heard those words, don't worry about it. You'll get a chance to hear about them. It's why we work the circle. It's why we do spiritual friendship. It's why we do meditation. It's why we do self-examination. It's why we do the Enneagram. It's why we do learning. It's why we do serving, because the practices help us not run from the tension of curiosity. The practices help us move beyond the anxiety of not knowing, the anxiety that curiosity evokes in us. The practices help us be curious and help us stay curious. Help us not ramrod preconceived expectations. Help us not jam through predetermined outcomes. Now, I've done that. I know you have. We've done that. It helps us not do that and wait and listen and think and see. Because if we do that ramrod approach on the basis of our certainty and our fixed beliefs, we tend to squeeze out wonder. We tend to squeeze out inquiry. We tend to squeeze out discovery. Now, at Common Thread, we talk all the time about accessing the inner light. We talk about hearing the inner whispers, about listening for the quiet voice, the divine nudges, the inner wisdom, some part of us that we carry within that is deeper than the constant prattling of our ego minds. Well, what that is curiosity. It's a quest for something bigger than we think we know. It's a quest for the bigger picture. It's a quest for the deeper wisdom. It's a quest for a bigger truth. And curiosity helps us be attentive. Curiosity helps us do the two-step dance of the spiritual journey. It helps us desire and then pay attention, to be listeners. Curiosity helps us become attentive for the interior voice, to become alert, watchful, listening. And we do that by simply asking, what am I missing? What am I missing? Oneness people are curious people. Now, what that means is that oneness people must deal with the anxiety that curiosity triggers. So, curious people have to do the spiritual practices, have to work the circle, because they help us draw from that deeper part of ourselves, that better part of ourselves. Okay, for the bulk of today, I want to tell you a story. It's an illustrative story. It kind of illustrates the principle. Now, this story happened on a great big historical stage, but it's the same story that plays out on all of the smaller stages that are your life and my life. So you can read all the details in the companion book. It's about what happened behind the scenes as South Africa transitioned from apartheid to democracy. And it's about how contact and curiosity were essential for avoiding civil war. In the 4 years between Nelson Mandela's release from prison and being elected president, South Africa was getting closer and closer to, many said, on the brink of civil war. And that's the story I want to tell you. But first, a little bit of background. About 40 years before that, an American psychologist had gone to South Africa to do an extended study. His name was Gordon Allport, and by the time he got there to do the study, apartheid had already been established in law. Mixed marriages were prohibited, living spaces were segregated, and the best jobs went to the white folks. And the question that was driving Allport's study, triggered by our own nation's racial troubles, was, how does prejudice happen, and can we change it? How does prejudice happen, and can we change it? Now, before going to Africa, he'd done a lot of research in a lot of different places, and he thought he had it figured out. He had a very strong hypothesis. And the principle was simple: contact. Here's how we solve division: contact. Racial division, ethnic and political division, what we need to be oneness people in a two-ness world, we need to create contact. Get people into the same spaces, rubbing elbows with one another, doing everyday life with one another. So that was his premise, that was his hypothesis. And as you might imagine, the scientific community fell at Allport's feet, effusive in their gratitude for his life-changing insight. Yeah, no. They were not impressed. They called him simplistic, and they called him naive. There is a lot more, they insisted, to human prejudice than that condescending head pat, Mr. Allport. But again, he'd done his research. He'd done that before he went to South Africa. And he found again and again that contact worked. One of the places he'd studied was Detroit after the race riots in the 1940s. Found out again and again that people who had become neighbors together, who had been in contact with one another, did not riot against one another. In fact, they shielded one another. And in the Army, despite the rules prohibiting it during World War II, when black and white soldiers would fight side by side, the rate of dislike one for the other went down by 9 times compared with other troops. So he came to this study in South Africa believing that apartheid was not the solution to South Africa's problems. Apartheid was the cause of South Africa's problems. When people meet, he was studying, in their neighborhoods, their schools, their work, their church, anywhere, when they get to know one another, contact triggers curiosity. And contact awakens our survival of the friendliest instincts, our together superpower, contact. So it's 1956, and off he goes to South Africa. He undertakes this extensive study, and after he does, and after this study is finished, he now doesn't believe it anymore. He begins to doubt his whole hypothesis. Everything that he had found contradicted everything he believed, because here in South Africa, black folk and white folk had been in contact, and still there was deep division. They had been side by side for centuries, and still deep mistrust. So he concluded, I guess they're right. I guess my hypothesis was too simplistic. I guess it was too naive. I guess history is just too strong. And then he died doubting his own theory. Great story so far, huh? Now fast forward to the 90s. And now stadiums are filled with thousands of people chanting for civil war. One group wearing brown shirts and waving swastika-like symbols. The other group with tire necklaces and AK-47s. And there is lots of anger, and there is lots of fear, and there are lots and lots and lots of guns. One group is afraid of losing their flag and their anthem and their culture and their land, and they cast themselves as freedom fighters, and they are ready for war. And they recruit a leader, Constant Viljoen. He's a respected military man, and he comes out of retirement to lead what they believe will be the inevitable civil war. A bloody conflict, he says, requires sacrifice, but we will gladly sacrifice because our cause is just. And he rallies the troops. So, under his leadership, the Afrikaners recruit 150,000 troops, 100,000 of them experienced military people, all queued up, all ready to go. Now, on the other side, the ANC is just as ready for bloody conflict, and their thousands are just as ready to make great sacrifice because they are just as convinced that their cause is just. Now, had it not been for three people, very likely civil war. Two twin brothers and Nelson Mandela, and they begin to practice in a very simple way contact and curiosity. One of the twins, Constant, he was that Afrikaans military leader. And his twin brother, Bram, had become a religious man. One had gone into the military, the other had gone abroad right after their teen years to study religion. And so now it's 1993, 10 months before the election. The ANC will win, it's very clear, and then the thousands will go to war. And Bram realizes that he has a chance. If he could win his brother over, there could be a peaceful transition to democracy. But if he could not, war. So he goes to visit his brother, and it does not go well. Constant tells him in no uncertain terms, war is an inevitability. War is our only option. So Bram asks his brother for something simpler. Would you sit down and talk with the other side? Now, this was not a new proposal. Constant had already rejected the same proposal 9 times. But this time, it was his brother asking, so together they secretly go and they visit Nelson Mandela. And later, Constant reported, expecting to be met by staff, he's instead met by Mandela standing in the driveway waiting for them. And he asked them if they'd like tea, and then he pours it himself. And he asked them if they take milk in their tea, and then he pours the milk himself. And he asks if they would like sugar in their tea, and then he pours the sugar themselves. All I had to do, Constant reported later, was stir it. And then they talked. And it became quickly clear that Mandela was a curious man. Curious about the history and the culture of the Afrikaners. He told the story about the military man's own family, about how they had struggled against the British 100 years before. Because Mandela had been asking the curiosity questions. What am I missing here? He'd been practicing contact, and he'd been practicing a curiosity. He'd done it with the Afrikaner guards in the prison where he was held for the 25 years before this. So not much happened at that first meeting, except they both agreed that if we go to war, there will be no winners. If we go to war, there will be no winners. So they met again, and again, and again. For 4 months, they met in secret, practicing together contact and curiosity. They got to know each other, doing the very simple things that human beings do to get to know one another. They shook hands with one another, they talked to one another, they listened to one another, and over time they began to understand, and then they began to respect, and then they began to redefine one another. Before, one had defined the other as a terrorist, and the other had defined the other as an occupier. But contact and curiosity began to create space for a mutual and growing regard. And then the election happened, and the ANC won, and civil war did not happen. Because Mandela and Viljoen practiced contact and curiosity. They both tapped into their sapient superpower, the one that is in us. And then they both led their people to a peaceful transition. Now, remember the first guy, Alport? One of his students, after he died, the one who had done the 1956 study with him, kept going. And he kept working on the concept of curiosity and contact after Alport died. And then in 2006, he was invited to come back to South Africa to do a conference. And by then, he had accumulated 515 studies from over 38 countries. And now the evidence had become conclusive. Alport had been right all along. Contact works. It works because it engenders trust. It works because it engenders solidarity and kindness. It makes us more accepting. It makes us less anxious. It stirs our curiosity and invites us to ask ourselves, what am I missing here? Contact and curiosity help us tap into our sapient superpower. Stay at a distance, on the other hand, stay separate, and no. Do that, and we stay anxious. We stay shut down. We stay uncurious and fixed and rigid and certain. We stop listening and we stop discovering. And the other stays the other forever. Now, these are two very practical and very important principles if we're going to be oneness people living in the moment that we're living in right now. Contact and curiosity. But there's a problem. We live increasingly separated from one another. We have less contact in our zip codes and in our schoolrooms and in our social circles. And on top of that, there's more than just being in proximity to one another behind this principle. Because contact works when it evokes curiosity in us. That's when we begin to explore our deeper selves. It is the curiosity that contact triggers that is the key. Because if we are in proximity to one another and we don't talk and we don't interact, contact can actually increase division between us. So there's a rapid influx of immigrants, and they don't have any interaction, and all of those postcodes where that happens vote pro-Brexit. In Holland, there's a flood of Syrian refugees who moved rapidly into one neighborhood. And sure enough, there is anger, and there is yelling, and there is name-calling, and there is stone-throwing. Proximity by itself is not enough. But 2 years later now, the refugees are relocated, and now in that same neighborhood, there is sadness and a sense of loss. We had problems at first, one interviewee said, but then we got over it. And now I really like going for coffee with my neighbors. Contact works because it evokes curiosity, and curiosity triggers our sapient superpower, oneness. So, 2 big, important principles. And now the question is, what are we going to do? What are you going to do? What am I going to do? Because our world is configured against both of those principles. All of the narratives that we pick up from our society, they are not curiosity narratives. They are fixed, rigid, and certain. And all of our zip codes are organized to keep us out of contact with one another. Everything that's going on in our world is configuring more and more to work against these two principles. So, what are we going to do? What are we going to do, and how are we going to do it? Here, now, small, doable. What are we going to do? Now, that's what we're going to be talking about here in the room during What Are You Thinking? If you're at home, I really hope you will talk about it too, because contact is a thing, and curiosity is a thing. They are both get us out of this mess that we're in kinds of things. And the cards are stacked against us. So we come back to the question, what are you going to do? What are we going to do, and how are we going to do it? Who is your other? Who are you divided from? And how can you create contact that can evoke curiosity? The things that we've witnessed this week, the greater division going on in our society, those are just overwhelming. I don't know what to do about gun shootings. It doesn't appear that anybody else, or school shootings, I don't know, it doesn't appear anybody else knows what to do. But I know what to do about the division that drives those kinds of things. We start here, now, small, doable, and we do something. We create contact because we're talking about it. Who's going to initiate it? We are, because we're talking about it. And we become curious. We create contact, and we become curious. What am I missing? So, indwelling divine, may we be oneness people, curious people, contact people. Amen. So if you would, please prepare your offerings. We all donate on our website. At the top of the page, there's a donate button. At the end of each year, some of us catch up on our giving, and sometimes Scott tells us at the end of the year that we have an account so that we can receive stock as a donation. Now, we don't hold on to the stock. We don't speculate. As soon as we get it, we sell it. We turn it into money. But we have that because there are significant tax advantages, because you get the credit on the appreciated value, but you only had to be taxed on the part you paid in. So if that would help you, you can use the Who to Talk To page on our website and get a hold of Scott. And as we say, when we give our time and our energy and our love and our dollars to spiritual community, a great return on investment, because what we're doing when we do that is creating the environment in which human beings thrive, in which we grow, in which we flourish. So we donate again at the top of our website, commonthreadchurch.org. Now, in a moment, we will dismiss the live stream, and together here in the room, we'll do What Are You Thinking? Today's questions are in the live stream notes. I really do hope you'll talk about them at home. And if you would, as we dismissed them, let's put our hands on our hearts, and let's remember as we go that we are, every one of us, carriers of the indwelling divine. We carry love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness. We carry that superpower, the capacity for togetherness. And if you would extend your other hand to our city, let's look for opportunities to share what's in us with the people that we live and work and go to school with, looking for opportunities to repair and heal our worlds. Amen. God bless you all. You are dismissed.